clearly there's examples in the world at the moment where there appears to be more conflict than there has been before, but we're a more peaceful planet, aren't we, as a whole, than we've been at most points in the past?
Are you living in the same world I'm living in?
No, I'm not, but I'm not living during the Second World War. I'm not living during the First World War. I'm not living during any of the great plagues or the great tribulations that have shaken the human history in the not so distant and the distant past.
But we're sitting here. We've got a lunatic in the White House in the United States, and we're sitting on the verge of global nuclear conflict. And don't ever think that he's not going to try it, because he is.
Yeah, but that's scaremongering, with all due respect.
It's not scaremongering. The man is a psychopath. He will do it. He will do it.
Well, we've
take it to the bank.
I think from a factual point of view, we've been a lot closer to nuclear apocalypse in the past. That doesn't mean to say that we need to be complacent, to use your own words now. But I think I don't think that it's out of order for me to say that that's scaremongering language.
Well, look at the United States. It has turned into a fascist police state. The UK is practically a fascist police state. I mean, it's everywhere.
I think anyone who lived in Nazi Germany or lived in France under occupation would definitely react against that statement.
I don't think so.
Wouldn't they?
No, I absolutely do not think so. I have studied this extensively. And the comparisons between Nazi Germany and the United States today are vast and numerous.
Do you have a secret police that takes people in the middle of the night and they never reappear?
Apparently they do.
In large numbers?
Well, they're starting to get the numbers larger and larger. They've got a place called Guantanamo. It's just the beginning.
Okay, well that's, it's an interesting way of interpreting things. If we move on, though, and look maybe in the deeper and more distant past, I believe that the roots of your book go way back into ancient civilizations.
Yes.
And, I mean, obviously, I'm assuming civilizations where we don't have a great deal of documentary evidence as to how they functioned, and an awful lot of that is conjecture. So what have you interpreted from the ancient civilizations?
Well, the one thing that I looked at particularly was myth, and if myth is a survival of this ancient technology that I theorized to have existed based on certain archaeological finds that I enumerate in the book, it seems to me that, for example, the myth of Perseus. Perseus was given a pair of sandals that helped him to fly, and a helmet that gave him invisibility, and various accoutrements that helped him accomplish his particular mission to cut off the Gorgon's head. Now, a lot of anthropologists say that these kinds of myths developed, as a way to explain the forces of nature. But if you're just explaining the forces of nature, and you have say a super being who can fly, why do you want to put sandals on him to give him that ability to fly? Why can't he fly without sandals? Because there certainly are other mythical beings who are able to fly or to transport themselves hyperdimensionally. They don't need sandals. So essentially what you're looking at is you're looking at a technological object that enables this person to fly. Then of course there are the Vedas, where they have these vimanas, these ships that they would fly in and engage in what seems to be nuclear war. And if you look at these myths, for example, the series of Grail myths, there's a lance, there's a cup, there's a platter, a talking head. There's several elements to the Grail myths, all of which, if you understood them properly, might indicate an ancient technology. And I go into that in the book to some extent to try to show how, if a civilization ended and all of the infrastructure of that civilization was destroyed, essentially, how the survivors would tell the stories about what civilization was like to their children, to their grandchildren, and how after several generations these stories of this ancient culture, this ancient technology would be transformed into myth. And that is what I think we see when we see these ancient myths of flying and special powers and mastery of space and time.
And you mentioned archaeological evidence. What kind of archaeological evidence are we talking about? Because obviously, you know, I'm obviously, you know, I've been to Stonehenge, and just the very fact that we still don't know why these amazing edifices were created thousands of years ago. Of course, there's strong theories, but what would your theories be?
Well, I would say the Stonehenge itself is an energy accumulator, and it probably worked with human beings as part of the machinery. They interacted with the stones to gather the energy or to gather it into themselves. It was a human hyperdimensional interface. One of the ancient legends is that the god Apollo danced at Stonehenge every 19 years. There's an 18.5-year cycle between the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun, which is, you know, a three-body system that every 19 years, or 18.5 years, it returns to the same position. And at those times, there is a theory that during those times that a gravitational node exists at a certain point between the Earth and the Moon, which could be a doorway to a hyperdimensional access. So if they're talking, you know, if they knew in those ancient times about this particular three-body system cycle, and they talked about the god Apollo dancing at Stonehenge every, you know, 19 years or 18.5 years, then they obviously understood something about hyperdimensional realities.
So why have we become ignorant to this knowledge? What has been the force behind that?
Well, many times there have been events that happen on the Earth that wipe civilizations out. I've just finished reading an interesting book by a physicist. His name is Richard Firestone, and he talks about the most recent extremely cataclysmic event, which was about 1,300 or 13,000 years ago, which puts it right at the time of Plato's Atlantis. And he goes through extensive, excruciating detail, and he discovered and analyzed all of the material that shows that the entire planet was bombarded by. He discovered and analyzed all of them of a swarm of cometary bodies that exploded, you know, either in the air or impacted. He proposes that the southern end of Lake Michigan is a cometary impact crater, and that there was one in Hudson Bay, and he has found several others around the planet, and that basically at this point in history, nearly the entire human race was wiped out, as well as all of the megafauna of Europe and North America and South America too.
And the knowledge was lost at that point, and
well,
at points like that in human history.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, and also another thing that happened was that the sea level rose 400 feet. So the evidence for you know most of our civilization lives on sea coast or on you know along sides of rivers. So if your sea level has risen 400 feet since then, or at that time, an awful lot would be covered up. And of course, if you have exploding comets in the atmosphere, such as if you have hundreds of thousands of the Tunguska event happening. Now imagine, because you look at the Carolina Bays in the United States, and there are hundreds of thousands of them. And actually, the Carolina Bays are not the only place in the United States where there are these particular features. He shows how they also exist all over the Southwest, that they are also in the in other areas of the world, that there are some of them even in Ireland, I believe. So that this was a massive global event 13,000 years ago that almost literally wiped out the entire human race.
And was that perpetrated by these beings, or was that...
Oh, no, that's a natural cycle. Those are natural cycles. But you see, they know and understand the cycles, and then they do everything they can to keep us from knowing and understanding those cycles.
So it wasn't a question that we got to a point where we almost knew too much and we were being reined back, as it were.
Well, you could say that, because and maybe it's just a natural cycle that when human beings, get to the point where they can destroy themselves, that's just the way it happens. And that may be where we are now.
So, having written the book and having studied these subjects extensively, your worldview does sound bleak, I'm afraid to say, Laura. Is that your feeling? Do you feel as bleak as the very stark manner in which you describe the current state of America at this point in time?
Well, personally for myself, I don't feel all that bleak about it. I just do what I can to try to make as many people aware of the possibilities as I can, and if more people become aware, then they can possibly do something to change it.
I'm not living during the First World War. I'm not living during any of the great plagues or the great tribulations that have shaken the human history in the not so distant and the distant past.
But we're sitting here. We've got a lunatic in the White House.
Clearly there's examples in the world at the moment where there appears to be more conflict than there has been before, but we're a more peaceful planet, aren't we, as a whole, than we've been at most points in the past.
Are you living in the same world I'm living in?
No, I'm not, but I'm not living during the Second World War.
In the United States, and we're sitting on the verge of global nuclear conflict, and don't ever think that he's not going to try it, because he is.
Yeah, but that's scaremongering, with all due respect.
It's not scaremongering. The man is a psychopath. He will do it. He will do it.
Well, we've
take it to the bank.
I think from a factual point of view, we've been a lot closer to nuclear apocalypse in the past. That doesn't mean to say that we need to be, complacent, to use your own words now, but I think I don't think that it's out of order for me to say that that's scaremongering language.
Well, look at the United States. It has turned into a fascist police state. The UK is practically a fascist